So why is there so much anti-Semitism? It's a topic that so many Jews talk about and think about, and it seems to basically defy explanation. And if you look throughout history about why Jews are hated, the reasons, or the supposed reasons, seem to be unending. We hate Jews because they're rich, because they're poor, because they're passive, because they're aggressive, because they're strong, because they're weak, because they're different, because they're alike. There seems to be no logical explanation for it. And many of the biggest experts basically come to the conclusion that there is no explanation for anti-Semitism. It's one giant illogical phenomenon. It's a sickness. And the best we can try and do is to educate the world that we don't do these things. Jews don't poison wells. We don't control the world's economy. We don't use Christian babies' blood to bake matzah or even trigger tsunamis in Southeast Asia to drown Indonesia. These are all real things that are said about us. Or we can actually go a little deeper and look at the traditional Jewish view of what anti-Semitism is about. You see, the basic view that the Jewish people have is from Abraham onward, the Jewish people have a unique mission in this world. To connect the world to God, to absolute meaning, to elevate the world morally and spiritually, to be a nation that's a light unto nations, which means to take responsibility to teach the world values, spiritual values, ethical values. That's what chosen people has always meant to the Jewish people. Chosen for unique responsibility to fix the world. And we understand that's a struggle that involves thousands of years and generations of Jews. Throughout history, the national historic mission of the Jewish people has been to bring the world back to God, often kicking and screaming, because we say there's a constant battle between the values that the Jewish people have been trying to bring into the world that are based on that relationship with God. Value of life and peace and social responsibility, education, fixing the world, and the forces that are constantly against that. And when those forces come into the world, they will naturally target the Jewish people. And therefore, throughout history, even though we've been always accused as a people of all kinds of outrageous things, some seem a little more believable than others, Jewish economic power, for instance, versus poisoning wells and using Christian babies' blood to bake matzah. When we analyze all of these supposed causes for anti-Semitism through the lens of fact and history, we see that really none of them begin to explain anti-Semitism. Poor Jews are hated, rich Jews are hated. When we're different, we're hated for being different. When we assimilate, the anti-Semitism, ironically, actually is worse. But if we clear all those excuses aside and look at the real cause, we understand that basically what powers anti-Semitism throughout history is it's a revolt. It's a millennial-long revolt against this national historic mission of the Jewish people to bring certain values into the world. It's not an accident, by the way, that I would say the greatest evil people, certainly in modern history, are also the biggest anti-Semites. Because if you think about it, the values that evil people, who, by the way, never say they're evil, they think they're actually good. But if you look at the mindset of some of these people, the values that they embody are antithetical to the very values that the Jewish people have been trying to bring into the world for thousands of years. One of the best people, I think, to look at is Adolf Hitler. One of the biggest mistakes we make with someone like Hitler is to call him crazy, or he's unbalanced, he was a nutcase. First of all, we know that truly crazy people end up in institutions. Hitler had his issues, but certainly he was a man of tremendous potential, albeit evil. The other problem we make with some people like Hitler and people like bin Laden is to assume that they're just jokers, when the reality is these people are very intellectual and idealistic. And perhaps by looking at the mind of Adolf Hitler, we can get some very, ironically, interestingly enough, some very deep insights into what really fuels anti-Semitism. See, Hitler was a person who was extremely consistent in his attitude towards the Jews, from the very beginning of his political career to the last thing he said before he committed suicide in his bunker in the spring of 1945. And Hitler basically says, there's a couple of quotes that really sum it up better than anything else. Hitler said, "The war for domination of the world is fought between us and the Jews. All else is facade and illusion. Behind England stands the Jews, and behind France. Even when we have driven the Jew out of Germany, he remains our world enemy." And Hitler wasn't claiming that the Jews controlled physically the economy or the political systems of Western European countries, but Hitler recognized that behind liberal democracy that Hitler and National Socialism, Nazism, was at war with, was an ideology that comes essentially from the Jewish people. He goes on to say that conscience, like circumcision, is a blemish. And he says they're both inventions of the Jew, which is an amazing backhanded compliment to give to the Jewish people. Hitler understood that the very values, conscience, right and wrong, in an absolute sense, come from, as he called, the Judeo-Christian ethic. They're products of the Jew. And like the pagan that Hitler really was, he understood, just as the Greek world of thousands of years ago rejected the idea of circumcision as a bizarre practice, and rejected the values that came from the Jews as being artificial, Hitler says they're not natural. The world can function in one of two ways. The natural way, the way empires used to function, where the strong dominated the weak, that's how it worked in nature, or an artificial concept called the human concept, where nations respect each other's borders, you take care of the weak, you take care of the sick. Hitler says that this human concept that has pervaded the world today, that is prevalent in all liberal democratic countries, is overwhelmingly a product of Jewish values. And he understood that to get rid of those values, he says to get rid of Christianity, we just have to destroy the church. To get rid of, communism, we just kill off Stalin and the Bolsheviks. But he understood that to truly change the world's values, it wasn't enough to kill off the rabbis or to burn down the synagogues or the yeshivot. He said every Jew has within him or her this unique Jewish soul that pushes him or her, either in religious or secular ways, to constantly try and bring Jewish values into the world one way or another. Whether they come in the form of Judaism or liberal values, but they're all a product of the Jew, and every single Jew carries them. The Nazis and Hitler called the Jews bacteria. And he said to get rid of those values and truly change the world, we have to get rid of every single Jew. And when you look at Hitler, you actually recognize a very profound point that he understood what the Jewish people were, individually and collectively, and what the Jewish mission is and was better than most people and even most Jews understand today. But if you put it all together, we see pretty clearly that essentially what drives anti-Semitism, all the excuses and the ridiculous accusations aside, is it's a revolt against this national historic mission to do tikkun olam, to fix the world, to bring the world back to God. And if we understand that that ultimately is the cause of anti-Semitism, then we also understand what ultimately is the solution to anti-Semitism. You see, we Jews today in the Jewish world loves to obsess on the Holocaust, to build memorials and museums and to study anti-Semitism. It's probably the number one point of Jewish identity in the world today is something like the Holocaust, which is kind of sad because it's hardly positive Jewish identity, and we also lose the meaning and the message behind it. But if we really want to solve what seems to be the longest hatred, the most intense hatred, the most irrational hatred in the world, we have to understand what's truly causing it. If a doctor tries to treat a disease by using the wrong medicine, the disease will keep coming back. So too, if we try and deal with anti-Semitism by just teaching tolerance or trying to tell people that we don't do all these horrible things, it won't go away. But if we understand the true cause of anti-Semitism, it's this eternal revolt of humanity, struggling constantly like a beast backed into a corner, not wanting to accept these values, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, then we understand that ultimately the only solution to anti-Semitism is for the Jewish people to finish that mission that Abraham started thousands of years ago, to bring those values into the world, to truly elevate the world, to truly take the values that the whole world really does on a certain level want today. I mean, everyone seems to want peace. They want social responsibility. They don't quite know how to do it. But if we, the Jewish people, are able to finally finish that mission and elevate the world and complete the mission that Abraham started, then we'll have an end to anti-Semitism and we'll have peace for Israel and hopefully peace in all the world.